George Riddle. He was in the U.S. Army Signal Corps at the tail end of World War II and also served in the occupation force in Japan. He was in the 71st Signal Service Battalion, which was attached to Macarthur, and he attained the highest rank of Sergeant First Class. First thing I'd like to go ahead and ask you is, how did you get involved in your military experience?
Well, of course, I was a farm boy and lived on a farm, and that's the way we made our living. I was deferred 1 year for farm work before being drafted into the Army, and I decided I wanted to go ahead and go in, so I didn't seek any further deferment and was drafted into the Army, the Infantry, and I took my Army training, Camp Roberts, California, infantry training. That was, I don't remember exactly how many weeks, but it was a very intense training. And
what sort of weapons did they train you with?
Well, M1 rifle, the carbine rifle, and also we were 45 caliber pistol and flamethrower and machine gun, the BAR, I believe it was, and that's all I remember. That's totally it, mostly.
What was your impression using those guns? Which one? I mean, were you more proficient at one versus the other, and were there any of them that were better than others?
Well, the BAR was a pretty accurate and useful gun, and the carbine was a nice gun, but it had its limitations. That's flamethrower was quite impressive. Used in certain instances, not to. Anyway, that's about it, I think.
Mm-hmm. So then, after that, once you completed your weapons training, you said that was pretty difficult. What else? What came after that?
Well, of course, we went on what was called bivouac, and Camp Roberts is along the Salinas River on Highway 101 that goes up through from top to bottom of California almost, I think. And like I say, it's very hot. And one of the funny things, maybe, I guess, was you got a lot of your shots there, tetanus shots and a lot of different shots. And whenever it was ready for shots, they'd tell you to fall out in overcoats and not overcoats, but raincoats and overshoes. That's all. So you march from there to the dispensary where you got your shots, and lined up, of course, and then quite often. In fact, I remember one time we went on bivouac down along the Salinas River, and it was particularly hot that day, and there were people dropping here and there. And their training. Of course, this is not too far along in our training. We've been out there 7 or 8 weeks, probably, or more. And and there's also when at Camp Roberts there's a 40-acre asphalt parade ground. 40 acres of asphalt with one tree in the middle of it. And that's where they would line up. Of course, Camp Roberts was a pretty good size camp. 40,000, I think, were there about the time I was there. And it made a pretty good sized group. And again, hot weather and the sun shining down, and I've had people drop out beside me, pass out, and I never did, but I came pretty close, I think.
So after so how long did it take you for you to complete your training then?
Seemed like to me it was 17 weeks, but I'm not sure whether that's right or not.
Was there any part of the training that was more tough than the others, or was it pretty easy for you?
We went on some long marches. It was easier for me, being long-legged and at that time slender. I survived it fairly well. I was assistant platoon leader, acting gadget they called us. No rank, but acting. Anyway, and that gave me a room in with the platoon leader, separate from the others in the barracks, which were bunk beds and or cots, and we had a radio even, so which is a little privilege others didn't have.
So then after you completed your training at Camp Roberts, what was the next step after that? What was the next phase for you?
Well, actually, before I completed the training, the war was over. And, of course, then there was some question of what next, and soon they offered re-enlistments or discharge. And I think minimum re-enlistment was 3 years. And even though the Army was pretty strict and something new to me, it was okay by me, and I re-enlisted. You were able to choose a service, and I chose Signal Service. That's how I got into Signal Service. And for a 3-year enlistment. Of course, this meant some schooling to qualify for any job in the signal department. And I was sent from, after we went ahead and completed our training in Camp Roberts and graduated more or less, and everyone, but, and of course a lot of them chose to be discharged. But anyway, I was sent from there with leave to Camp Crowder, Missouri, which was about 300 miles from where I lived in Missouri. And so I started school there in Camp Crowder, and before I completed school, Camp Crowder was being closed. So I was then transferred to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and completed my schooling there. I completed schooling for the radio repair, which is the MOS, Military Occupation Service, I think that stands for, number 648. And also I had a 649, which I don't remember what that was, but anyway, that was my qualification. And after completing that and graduating, I was given leave and told to report to a replacement depot near San Francisco, California, which I did. I bummed a ride on a military aircraft from Topeka, Kansas to California, and reported in time for when I was supposed to be there, and was in the replacement depot for a while, and then was loaded on a troop ship, one of those Liberty ships that and headed to Japan.
And do you remember about when this was?
I don't remember. I have it, I think, from somewhere.
So this probably would have been around maybe Christmas of 1945, or was this in 46 by now?
Well, no, it wasn't in 45. It was 46
Okay.
At least. and because the schooling took quite a while. And anyway, and the experience of going on a troop ship, being and your bunk is about 4 or 5 levels of bunks, and on a ship, and a Liberty ship is not the best one for travel, but that's what it was providing then, and a lot of GIs on there headed to Japan, and and we actually went into to Yokohama, and was distributed out from there. Others went to different places, and
So what was your first impression when you first found out you were going to Japan? Was there any trepidation, or were you pretty much like, oh, okay, this will be interesting?
Well, I really didn't know. Like I say, I was a farm boy. I didn't know a lot about other countries. It was very interesting. The country was very interesting. The people were very interesting, industrious, and had been through a lot in what they had to deal with, like the no gasoline, and you would see young boys pulling carts, carrying different things, and they received the occupation army very well, no problems, and as far as I knew, and the place I was stationed in Tokyo was out on an island in Tokyo Bay called Transmitter Island, and that's what it was. It was a transmitting complex, we'll call it, that was the transmitting station for communications back to United States, to Korea, to Guam, and Manila. In other words, we had radio transmitters there that were transmitting this information. Transmit only, not receiving. Receivers were on another island. They were separated to keep from interfering with each other. Well, the transmitters interfering with them, but anyway, and the information we got was there was also on that same island a Air Force transmitting station further away from us, and then also we had a line construction gang which did pole line construction, open wire construction. Our antennas were actually on pole lines like that. They were directional antennas to pointing in the direction of the, and I'm talking about big acres of pole line shaped in a diamond shape, so they call them Yagi antennas. And we did some experimenting with those and making them more directional and so forth while I was over there, which is technical training too, really.
So what was the purpose of using a directional antenna?
Well, each transmitter was directed to a certain location. In other words, the transmitters going from Tokyo to United States, San Francisco actually, had to be powerful enough, directional enough that it could be received in San Francisco.
So it would shoot a signal in one direction, but no transmitters outside of that arc could pick that signal up.
Well, a certain efficiency, of course, is. And we also used some V-type, which were not quite as directional, but took a little less acreage to put them on. And we also generated our own power. We had power units that provided power for the station to run the transmitters on. The transmitters took a lot of power, and we learned how to phase those in connection with each other so that you didn't have blackouts, you know. And we got our information by cable from downtown Tokyo. I don't know whether this cable was put up before, was an existing Japanese cable, or was put up after. It was probably a year after the the war was over that I went over there. So some work had already been done, and since this was out on an island, there was always the possibility of tidal waves, and there was a seawall around the island, but to protect the transmitting station, they built a dike around it with using a silt pump out of the bay and pumping stuff out, and then also Japanese laborers carrying on baskets dirt to fill in the corners.
Wow.
And that's when I learned that rice must be a pretty good food, because they would stop for lunch and open their little box and eat rice with their chopsticks and fish too, I guess. I don't know, but and work and work and work. To see that, and the Japanese power, there was on another part of the island, there was a shipbuilding complex, Japanese shipbuilder, and whenever they were operating during the daytime, the power would really fluctuate, so we couldn't use their power too well. But in order to get away from the generators, we did have a regulating transformer put in. That wasn't part of my technical part of it, but anyway, which regulated the power, and whenever the voltage went down, it rotated and changed to make it regulate. And it was 50 hertz or cycles per second, where our power was, United States, is 60 hertz per second. And so that worked all right, however, but we had to synchronize our power to, whenever we generated, to their frequency. And whenever we shifted power, we tried not to ever let the power go off, and when we shifted from one to the other. Most of this now was radio teletype, and it was transmitted on a frequency shift principle. We also transmitted some pictures, which was also a frequency shift, and you could. We had a console with a switchboard on it, and a telephone switchboard also, but and there was always someone there at the console watching things, in sending the photos, we could tune in we had to set the frequency shift on a unit that was they had a long bay with a whole bunch of things in it, the frequency shifters to feed each transmitter. You had a patch panel to patch those from one to the other, and so forth. And you could tune in on the frequency meter and listen to the tone when they were sending photos, and it would just vary as they scan across. Now we talk about, and television scans real fast. This was just real slow, so you hear row, 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 and all that noise, and it was going from only black and white, and going from black to gray to white. And
So you have a different tone for whatever color
Right.
was being experienced by the scanning?
Yeah, the light or dark, really, because it's black and white, like I say.
Mm-hmm.
And question.
Well, how long were you over in Tokyo then, or in Japan?
I was in Japan a little over 2 years, I believe it was.
And you said that the population treated the occupation force very well, or,
Yes.
you know, as far as the attitude that they had.
Yes.
Did you see any? You mentioned, you know, there was that the population had been through a lot. Did you see any damage left over from the war when you were there?
Yes. There were areas of downtown Tokyo that weren't bothered at all, but there were areas pretty close to the downtown that were very badly damaged. And of course, when I wasn't out on that island all the time. I was in what they call the San Chin building. There's the name of the building, and it was probably an 8-story building that 71st Signal Service personnel lived in. And it was close to General Macarthur's headquarters, which is called the Daiichi building. It was across the avenue from the Imperial Palace grounds, and the Imperial Palace grounds had a moat around them, and that's where Hirohito lived, on the Imperial Palace grounds. And also, while I was over there, we had an emergency communication team in place in case something happened to our transmitter station. We could run out and set up emergency communication, not to the amount we had there, but still establish communications. And we'd go out and do that ever so often as a practice. We had our own portable power units pulled behind 6x6 trucks and a small group of guys that knew what they were doing, you know, and operators too. And usually that was when you go out on those, you had to have a telegraph operator to send, because you didn't have teletype machines particularly to go out. You had Morse code, and that we'd go out to different places, different areas. There was a time I was on an emergency team that we were out in a different part of Tokyo at what was a country club, and it had a stone wall around it, and with a narrow gate going into it, and they made an officers club out of that building, and then they gave us a section of it for us, our small team, to go in. There was only 5 of us, I believe it was, and 4 or 5. And later they built a prefab building for us to stay in. And they had to bring meals out from downtown Tokyo to us out there, because we didn't have any way of cooking meals.
So you mentioned Hirohito's palace, but do you know whether it was the target of any bombing or anything like that?
It was not.
So it was left intact on purpose.
And you know, that's something they did that probably was a wise move, because they didn't bother him at all. Left him in well, not in power, but anyway, I won't go into that. But yes, I have pictures of where we had parades in on the Imperial Palace grounds. A big place, really, and wide parade grounds and so forth. And all the Allied powers were over there. In fact, Macarthur was, you called it SCAP, Supreme Commander Allied Powers. And at one of the big parades, I didn't have to march in the parade, but, well, it's mainly the Army troops. 1st Cavalry was the biggest group over there. And then the French were there, even the Russians were there. And I had the opportunity one time to go to the French consulate to try to fix a radio. Well, I guess I did fix a radio transmitter that they were using for their communications. I think it was more ham radio than anything. But anyway, since I was a radio repairman, I went out there and worked on their radio equipment. And
So did you ever see General MacArthur?
oh yes, I saw him quite often. And there would be quite a group gathered out in front of the Daiichi building. The Daiichi building was an interesting building. I've been 7 floors below, well, make that 5 floors below ground level. And down there, the building was mounted on rollers, because that's a lot of earthquakes in Japan. I felt a number of them while I was over there. But that building was made to withstand earthquakes.
Wow.
And quite an impressive building, really. That was where our communications offices were, and that's where we received our transmitting signals from. I mean,
So your communications office was in the Daiichi building, which was part of Emperor Hirohito's Imperial Palace. Is that
No.
No, that was MacArthur's.
right, MacArthur's
Okay.
building, yeah.
So even back in 1946, they had the foresight to build these buildings on rollers because of the earthquakes.
Yes.
Wow. I didn't
Yeah,
realize
I don't know
that.
how old that building was, but it was there when we got there, and like I say, that area wasn't bombed at all.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Did you get to interact with the civilian population at all?
Oh, definitely. In fact, we lived in, when I was out on the island there, we lived in Quonset huts. And we had houseboys do our housework for us, which was all right too.
Yeah.
They'd shine our shoes if we wanted them to.
I'm sure they were probably eager to earn any sort
Well,
of living
yes,
that
and
could,
they were
so.
very congenial. And I've got pictures with the houseboy, you know, and with the other guys.
Did you get to do much traveling while you were there?
No, I had a short leave to, went to Atami, I believe the name was, for a rest and relaxation, 3 or 4 days, something like that. And then a few other trips. Well, went to Mount Fujiyama, and not a whole lot other than that, no.
You know, looking back at your service or anything, are there any memories or any things that really stick out after all this time, you know, that you think really impacted your life?
Well, the opportunity, like I say, as kind of a farm boy and going from nothing. Actually, I had an interest in, I had done some electrical house wiring even when I got into high school, and because where I lived, it was out in the country, and the rural electrification come through, and nobody knew how to. So I got a book and learned how to do house wiring, and did some, and it met inspection. But anyway, the opportunity to learn, and that you know, after I got out of the Army and went ahead the electronics and training and so forth, I went to school in Kansas City, And I could, when there were questions on, well, even on the federal test I had to take to get a license for radio broadcasting, I could visualize those coil things we had to change in the transmitters that were in Tokyo that to answer the questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it really served me well. And whenever we, at the end of the schooling, we took license exams. There were quite a group from the Central Technical School there in Kansas City to go up there to take the test. And they gave you the second class test, which qualifies you for working on two-way radio, but not on radio broadcast. And and a lot of them, quite a few failed, quite a few of them made it. Mm-hmm. Probably more than half, though, made the second class test. Well, the second class test seemed to be a breeze for me, so I went ahead and took the first class test and passed it too.
Wow.
But again, what I'd experienced in Japan and the schooling I'd had before that prepared me, even though I come through the same school that they did in the United States, I had up on them because most of that schooling I had at Central Technical School was fairly easy for me. Mm-hmm. And again, because I'd had a feeder, and that even the discipline of the Army and so forth was, I took to okay. That didn't bother me, and for the most part, I enjoyed the service. Mm-hmm. I right off was, assistant platoon leader and got a little leadership experience there. When I went to school in Camp Crowder, I was guidon bearer. We marched to school by military music from where our barracks were to the school.
Oh, really?
And anyway, in parades, I was the guidon bearer we were divided into platoons and of course in companies also. But mm-hmm. That experience did me well, even in civilian life.
Mm-hmm. Were you able to? Did you keep in touch with your family quite a bit when you were over there?
Yes, by letter.
Mm-hmm.
And they had what did they call that? They had a lightweight letter. But anyway, it was just physical letter, but even sending money home. I don't remember how I did that, but I was able to buy a new car when I got home from some of the savings I made.
Now, after since you came in at the tail end of the war and served for then 3 years after that, were you able to receive the benefits of the GI Bill?
Yes, in fact, the schooling in Kansas City was the tuition was GI Bill. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether I said that before or not, but anyway, after I got out of high school, I was intending to go to engineering school in Columbia, Missouri. But, actually electrical training more. And, so I really got training and some real good experience. Not the same thing, but there are some things that even schools don't prepare you for. Mm-hmm. And this prepared me for what I did after I got out, I thought.
So you really had a lot of good training. You actually started out with an interest in electrical engineering, basically, before you even got into the service.
Right.
And then you were able to utilize that skill all throughout the service and hone it. and then go to school for it afterwards. So you really got a really good jump start on your career.
Well, yes, I feel that way.
Yeah, that's good. So what did you go on to do after you got out of the military?
I had a variety of jobs. First, I went to work for a broadcast station in Joplin, Missouri, and got married, had a young son, but television became a booming industry at that time, and I had an opportunity to go to do television service in Kansas City, and that's where my wife's folks were from, and so forth, and I was from that area also. So I quit the radio broadcast station and Joplin and moved back to Kansas City and did television service. And then I got an opportunity to go to work for the Frisco Railroad in Springfield, Missouri, as a communications. And one of the requirements was you had to have a second-class telephone license or better, and well, I had first class, and it involved work on communications, two-way communications. I'm skipping one here. I forgot. I worked for TWA for a short while as a radio mechanic, and it was shift work, and I worked for them, I think, 10 months. During that time, they were flooded, and but that really didn't bother me. I mean, we had a job and definitely cleaning up and working on aircraft equipment and so forth, but it was so detailed that I just really didn't care for it, and shift work and seniority system and just several things about it I didn't like. So I worked for them 10 months, and even though I was looking forward to using some of those flying benefits, I chose to go to work for the railroad. And the railroads were just going into putting in new radio equipment to their engines and cabooses, and so they had new equipment. TWA had old war surplus equipment, but the other interesting thing was I wasn't working for the railroad all that long before, and I worked in different places: St. Louis, Memphis, Birmingham, and putting in communications equipment, quite a bit of it, really, and building radio base stations for different places to put in, and some of that stuff wasn't, the control equipment was not all of commercially available, so we built our own, and it was and also during about the same time, why solid state, that was all tube stuff to begin with, electronic, anyway. And of course, that's what my training was in vacuum tube theory. But solid state equipment come along, and man, was that a change! And along with problems, and you had to solve the problems and work around them and do whatever it took to make them work. And it was. Again, even though I hadn't been, the experience I'd had was strictly with vacuum tubes, it wasn't, the transition wasn't all that bad. And then, of course, from transistors, they went to integrated circuits and so forth. And but as I worked in installing communications equipment, then I went to, I was promoted to a signal supervisor here in Tulsa, signal and communication supervisor. and the electronics in signaling was just starting out, and it really boomed. And we had hotbox detectors, which checked the trains as they were rolling by to see if they had any hot journals and stuff like that, and motion sensors to check for trains approaching crossings, and just a lot of electronics.
Wow.
You look down the railroad, you wouldn't think it, and circuits that operate over the track that runs down through the dirt, and really work good without fail. And the thing about their circuits is they had to be fail safe. In other words, if anything went wrong, they operated a red signal or gates down or flashing lights. And so they were very, it was a new game, but it was still all electronics, and well, anyway, again, what I'd had before prepared me for that also. And but all of that, and I only worked for the railroad 28 years, and they offered early retirement to a particular group because of a merger with the Burlington Northern, and so I had to travel, and I was driving in one night, and I thought I'd sign my papers tomorrow, and I did, and I was never sorry. But I went on to other things in satellite communications, energy management, and also as a consultant for a private company in installation of communications equipment, or well, signal equipment rather, and that's where I am.
Served you well then, didn't it?
It did. It did. I would say this would be a good recruitment.
I'd like to turn the camera on some of your photos, maybe have you kind of walk us through and explain some of the photos that you have right now. So what I'll do is I'll stop the camera real quick and we'll take it off the tripod, and then we'll pick back up, just kind of, you're going through some of your items here if you don't mind.
Well, I don't mind at all. The quality of those is not the greatest, but we'll see.
All right.
Graduated from Camp Roberts, and
Now where are you at here?
I'm way over on the, well, I'd have to look real close, but it's right here, I think I am.
Right there.
Arms folded.
Looks like you got a little bit of a grimace on your face there.
Yeah.
Tired of military life already?
Well, that was the graduation from Camp Roberts. I don't have any pictures of the schooling that I took in Camp Crowder or Fort Monmouth. And but next thing is going overseas by ship.
So that was the Liberty ship that you took?
I believe that's the one.
Do you recall the name of it by any chance?
General Shanks, I think. Well, one of them was General Shanks. Well, now, while I was in Japan, there are some pictures here, but I don't have them out here, but there's something else I wanted to show you.
No, I just had to move the cord for the power cord real quick before it unplugged the camera accidentally.
There's the Daiichi building.
Okay. And that's where Macarthur's headquarters were.
Yes. And this right here is the moat around the Imperial Palace grounds. The moat's in this side.
Now these are just other photos of other parts of Tokyo.
Yeah, there's
here.
some bombed out. Now, this is, I got a better picture, but this is, I believe, is the Ernie Powell Theater.
Oh, okay.
For the free movies, you know. There's another picture of Daiichi building. Here's the parade down the streets. Now they went off the Imperial Palace grounds and around to the streets.
And you said you did not have to participate in these parades, is that correct?
That's right. I had a, oh, here it is. On there it says it's for a certain vehicle. I was at the parade reviewing stand giving the orders when to shoot the gun and so forth. I had a 17 or 21 gun salute, I don't know which it was. Anyway, I relayed the information from the reviewing stand to the gun battery. And that's out on the parade ground. And like I say, that's downtown. Here, that's not a very good picture, but there's flags of the different countries that are involved in this parade.
Mm-hmm.
And
It says color guards from all the units which participated in the parade dipped their colors during the gun salute to General Macarthur, which began the great demonstration.
Now, to the, I wanted to show a picture of the transmitter. Well, I got some better pictures, but I don't see them right now. But here's some of the transmitting equipment. And back over here, maybe I can find some more. That's a picture. The early pile theater. This I wanted to show you. Thanksgiving 1946.
Mhm.
See, I was there in 46. Well, 48 actually is when I got out. And there's the menu for Thanksgiving Day. Real good menu.
Well, that looks good.
Just a regular, like you'd have at home.
Boy, that does sound good.
Yeah. And Tokyo had a lot of canals running through it, and here's kind of typical. And here's some of the streets. Not a too good
Okay.
picture there, but also I was involved in a communication team, and this is our equipment, and some of the guys that are involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Do you recall these gentlemen's names here by any chance?
well, one of them there is Petrie. No, I don't recall others. Yeah. And now, this is coming home. And I'm down here someplace. There's my 2 rockers. I sure did want to show you those pictures of the transmitter because I have a better picture. There I am on a rickshaw. That's about Ernie Pyle Theater there.
Okay.
There's my draft card, 1A. You've seen that one, Harrison.
Mm-hmm.
That's on Mount Fujiyama. That's some of the things I've done since then.
Okay, good.
This is telephone line connections, and here are some of the transmitters. Again, they're not as good as, but we had the press wireless 15 kilowatt transmitters, and Collins transmitter, and Federal. These are Federal, I think. There's the console, control console. Now here's the complex, not a very good thing, but picture, and here's our Quonset huts.
Now, is that your bunk there?
Yes. Well, mine or somebody's.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's just like it, in other words. Australian troops. And like I say, that's coming home. That's
Okay.
I believe that's the end of my story.
And that's it. Okay. Well, is there anything you'd like to add?
Here's a better picture of all, but no, I really don't. I value my experience with the Army, and I think I made the right decision, however, in getting out when I did, because and I wouldn't take anything from it, for it rather, and also the experience of being in a foreign country. The only other travel I've done has been within the United States, no other foreign travel, and so it broadens your view of a lot of things. It really does. And no, that's the gist of it, I think.
Okay. Well, thank you for your interview today, and we'll go ahead and conclude the interview here.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.